Shadows moved beneath ancient waters at a time when the world above was ruled not by predators, but by chaos itself. 200 million years before dinosaurs rose, land was a battleground of searing winds, unstable soils, and relentless danger, while the shallows offered structure, refuge, and predictable rhythms. Creatures that dared to surface felt the hostility of a planet still learning how to hold life, yet below the rippling light, survival found order. This is the story of the one era when the safer path lay beneath the surface, an invitation to descend into a world shaped by water, the savage ground. The land stretched endlessly beneath a sky heavy with shifting clouds, each gust of wind carrying the scent of scorched earth and distant rain. Across this perilous expanse, jagged rock formations tore through the soil like the spines of a wounded beast, while shallow gullies collected murky water that bubbled with decay and teeming insect life. Here, survival was dictated by a combination of vigilance, strength, and sheer luck, for predators roamed with unmatched audacity, and environmental hazards waited at every step. The terrain itself was treacherous. Soft mud clung to the feet of unwary creatures, while hidden sinkholes threatened to swallow the unwary whole, and sudden flash floods surged unpredictably through dry riverbeds, carrying debris that could crush anything in its path. Amid this unforgiving landscape, Gorgonopsids, apex predators of the late Permian, stalked their prey with terrifying efficiency. These saber-toothed therapsids reached lengths of up to 3.5 meters, with jaws armed with long, blade-like canines, designed to pierce the thick hides of large herbivores. Their limb structure, muscular and elongated, allowed bursts of speed across uneven ground, while their keen vision and acute olfactory senses enabled them to detect prey from over 100 meters away. Fossil evidence suggests Gorgonopsids hunted in semi-open terrains, using a combination of ambush and pursuit strategies, and their predatory dominance shaped the behavior and morphology of every other terrestrial species within their range. Closer to the ground, the arthroplurids scuttled, enormous millipede-like invertebrates reaching lengths of up to 2 meters, with rigid exoskeletons that protected them from smaller predators and allowed them to trample vegetation and unsuspecting smaller animals. Their jointed legs, numbering in the dozens, moved with surprising speed for such size, enabling them to traverse the unstable, cracked earth while searching for decaying plant matter and occasionally live prey. The combination of their bulk, armoured segments, and chemical defences made them formidable forces in the landscape, and fossilised trackways reveal patterns of methodical movement rather than random wandering, suggesting a deliberate adaptation to the terrain's hazards. Giant scorpions, such as Pulmonoscorpius kirktonensis, patrolled the shallow depressions and sedimentary basins, their pincers capable of exerting crushing force, and their venomous stingers delivering toxins strong enough to immobilize other arthropods and even small vertebrates. These predators were nocturnal specialists, emerging under the cover of darkness when temperatures fell and the air became thick with mist. Their survival depended not only on predation but on precise timing and environmental awareness. Even a minor miscalculation in navigating wet clay flats could result in fatal entrapment. The combination of venom, size, and mobility made them one of the most consistent threats to terrestrial life, demonstrating that danger on land was a multi-layered challenge, experienced from multiple heights and angles simultaneously. Vegetation, far from offering consistent shelter, introduced its own set of hazards. Ferns and early gymnosperms grew densely in low-lying areas, their fibrous fronds concealing predators like Gorgonopsids and limiting visibility. Certain plants produced toxins or sap that could irritate skin or mucous membranes, while others released spores and pollen in such quantity that respiratory distress may have been a real challenge for small terrestrial vertebrates. Meanwhile, periodic wildfires, ignited by lightning strikes and fueled by dry plant matter, could sweep across plains in minutes, forcing fleeing animals into narrow gullies where predators waited, creating a deadly funnel of survival and death. Hydrological hazards added another layer of unpredictability. Flash floods in ephemeral rivers could rise several meters within hours, their turbulent currents carrying boulders, trees, and trapped animals downstream. Mudflows transformed gentle slopes into viscous traps, immobilizing unwary herbivores, while stagnant pools became breeding grounds for pathogens, including fungal infections and early parasitic organisms, exacting a biological toll on those who lingered too long. Fossilized sedimentary layers indicate that the frequency of these hydrological events was high, suggesting that any creature spending significant time on land faced not only predation, but also the relentless threat of environmental upheaval. Even the soil itself, dry and cracked under relentless sun, held latent dangers. Temperatures could rise to extremes during daylight, while nights brought sharp drops, imposing thermal stress on ectothermic species. Some amphibians and early reptiles relied on burrowing to escape the heat or cold, yet not all terrain permitted excavation. Rocky outcrops and compacted clay made digging impossible, leaving species exposed. Tracks and burrows preserved in ancient strata demonstrate the spatial limitations imposed by substrate type, highlighting that survival depended on selecting precise microhabitats within a landscape of constant risk. Behavioral adaptations on land were therefore dictated by hazard avoidance at every scale. Herbivores such as parasaurs relied on massive body size and protective dermal armor to survive predator encounters, while nimble species like early diapsids employed speed, agility, and camouflage to navigate the fractured landscape. Groups of small vertebrates often moved collectively, using numbers to reduce individual risk and relying on instinctive detection of predator cues. Even reproductive strategies were influenced by terrestrial danger. Eggs had to be hidden in protective sites, and juvenile survival rates were low unless immediate cover or parental protection could be secured. Predation, environment, and climate together formed a relentless crucible, selecting for only the most adaptable and resilient species. Every movement, every feeding attempt, and every mating venture carried inherent risk, and the cumulative pressure of these threats profoundly shaped the evolutionary trajectory of terrestrial life. This era demonstrated that size, speed, intelligence, and strategy were all vital components of survival, and yet even the strongest or fastest could fall victim to a combination of predators, terrain, and sudden natural disasters. Against this backdrop, water emerged not merely as a habitat, but as a lifeline. Rivers, lakes, and coastal lagoons offered predictability. Currents moved steadily, pools provided refuge, and aquatic vegetation offered both food and concealment from land-based predators. Many species that were vulnerable on land began to exploit these aquatic refuges, developing behavioral, anatomical, and physiological adaptations that favored immersion over terrestrial risk. In the shimmering shallows, where gorgonopsids could not reach and scorpions could not traverse, life discovered an oasis of comparative safety, setting in motion evolutionary trajectories that would redefine survival in this volatile era. Sanctuary in the shallows. Light filtered through the shallow waters, scattering across a maze of reeds, mudbanks, and submerged logs where temnospondyls lingered, their broad, flat heads hovering just above the silty bottom. The water moved with a rhythm far gentler than the chaos of the land, carrying decaying vegetation, insect larvae, and tiny crustaceans that became essential nourishment for the creatures that had retreated from terrestrial threats. Temnospondyle amphibians, some measuring over a metre in length, pressed themselves into the muddy substrate, waiting with patient precision to snap up drifting prey, their wide jaws and rows of small conical teeth perfectly adapted for ambush. Each movement was deliberate. Even minor ripples betrayed the presence of others, demanding coordination and caution in a world where predator and prey shared the same sanctuary. Currents swept steadily through these shallow pools, bringing oxygen-rich water and sustaining early lungfish that navigated the silt-laden bottoms. Lungfish, with their primitive lungs, surfaced periodically to gulp air while probing the mud with fleshy, flexible fins, searching for insect larvae and small invertebrates. Their ability to switch between gill and lung breathing gave them an evolutionary advantage, allowing survival even when water levels dropped or oxygen concentration fell in stagnant pools. Sediment layers revealed traces of these movements, including shallow burrows where lungfish sought shelter from sudden storms or the approach of larger aquatic predators, illustrating that even within a haven, life demanded constant vigilance. Through mats of aquatic plants and dense reeds, microhabitats flourished with juvenile amphibians, tiny crustaceans, and small fish. These structural refuges offered protection from ambush predators like Hyneria, lurking in deeper channels, and eurypterids stalking through submerged vegetation. Juveniles learned to navigate narrow passages, weaving through tangled roots and plant stems with agility that would have been impossible on land, while still relying on instinctive freeze or flee responses to survive encounters with larger carnivores. In these underwater thickets, the interactions between predator and prey were measured, tactical, and often determined by subtle movements rather than brute force, a stark contrast to the lethal unpredictability of terrestrial encounters. The thermal stability of shallow waters also created advantages unseen on land. Sunlight warmed the pools during the day, sustaining metabolic activity for ectothermic species, while at night the water retained heat, buffering against rapid temperature drops. Oxygen gradients, influenced by plant photosynthesis and water flow, dictated activity patterns, with some species remaining motionless in oxygen-rich pockets and others venturing into marginal zones to forage. This interplay of light, temperature, and current shaped not only individual survival, but the distribution of entire species, reinforcing the idea that the water itself was an organizing framework for life. In the calm waters of these microhabitats, predation was measured and precise rather than disorderly. Hyneria, an apex predatory fish exceeding 3 meters in length, used ambush strategies rather than high-speed pursuit, relying on murky water and subtle current shifts to conceal its approach. Its muscular tail allowed rapid bursts of acceleration, while eyes positioned for binocular overlap provided precise depth perception, enabling it to snatch unsuspecting temnospondyle juveniles, or smaller fish, with astonishing accuracy. Smaller fish and amphibians responded with evasive swimming patterns, schooling behavior, and use of vegetation for cover, demonstrating that even in relative safety, life had to constantly negotiate risk with strategy. Ecosystem complexity grew as more species exploited the shallow refuges. Juvenile lungfish and small labyrinthodont amphibians interacted with invertebrates, both as predators and as prey, while sedentary filter-feeding organisms contributed to nutrient cycling within the pools. Detritivorous species processed decomposing plant material, creating a web of interactions that supported higher trophic levels. Observing these dynamics reveals that stability and abundance in aquatic environments allowed experimentation in morphology, behavior, and life cycles, providing evolutionary opportunities that land simply could not. Even reproductive strategies reflected the protective qualities of these waters. Temnospondyls laid eggs among dense vegetation, anchoring them to roots or plant stems to reduce the risk of drifting into deeper water or being exposed to aerial predators. Juvenile lungfish remained in sheltered shallow zones, protected from both terrestrial predators and larger aquatic carnivores, until their size and agility allowed more independent foraging. These behaviors illustrate that reproductive success in this era was intimately tied to the structural and chemical properties of aquatic habitats, a dependency that would shape species adaptations for millions of years. The presence of submerged logs, fallen trees, and silt mounds provided both refuge and hunting grounds, allowing species to manipulate and exploit their immediate environment. Temnospondyls could conceal themselves beneath plant mats, lungfish could burrow partially into sediment, and small predators used narrow channels to ambush prey. Such microhabitat specialization was facilitated by predictable water flow and substrate stability, emphasizing that environmental structure, as much as predator avoidance, dictated evolutionary pressures. In the shimmering shallows, the boundaries between predator and prey were dynamic and fluid, requiring constant attention, adaptability, and precise movement. Species developed enhanced sensory systems, lateral lines to detect vibration, eyes sensitive to low light, and tactile responses finely tuned to subtle water displacement. These adaptations, emerging in response to both opportunity and threat, demonstrated the remarkable ways life could exploit safety to refine skills, morphologies, and behaviors. By immersing themselves in these watery sanctuaries, temnospondyl amphibians, early lungfish, and countless other species discovered a world where survival depended less on the chaos of brute force and more on observation, patience, and subtle mastery of the environment. The shallow waters became a crucible of evolutionary innovation, where anatomical, behavioral, and ecological strategies converged to maximize security and access to resources. In these pools and lagoons, creatures learned the art of thriving in predictability, and while the land remained a place of peril, water offered a domain where life could experiment, adapt, and flourish, a prelude to the further transformations that awaited in fully aquatic existence. From feet to fins, muscles and joints worked in seamless coordination as Tiktaalik glided through shallow, murky currents, its robust pectoral fins flexing against the silt-strewn bottom with a precision that belied its size. Each fin contained wrist-like bones and strengthened joints, allowing it to pivot, push, and brace itself against irregular terrain while keeping its body low to avoid detection by lurking predators. The fish-like head, wide and flattened, shifted subtly with each movement, scanning for invertebrates and small vertebrates hiding beneath vegetation or trapped in muddy depressions. Fossil evidence reveals that Tiktaalik could support partial weight on its fins, enabling it to navigate temporary land incursions or dense underwater obstacles. A dual mastery of water and the edge of land that few contemporaries could achieve. Acanthostega moved differently yet with equal efficiency. Its webbed digits extended from fully formed limbs, providing stability while probing submerged roots and debris. Unlike Tiktaalik, Acanthostega remained primarily aquatic, using its limbs to maneuver with delicate control, adjusting its posture to maintain balance and conserve energy in slow-moving currents. The tail, elongated and laterally flattened, acted as a powerful rudder, generating bursts of acceleration when chasing prey or evading predators. Each anatomical feature was fine-tuned to exploit shallow waters, illustrating a careful evolutionary negotiation between the opportunities of aquatic life and the threats of terrestrial exposure. Bodies of these transitional species elongated and flattened over successive generations, minimizing resistance as they navigated reeds, siltbeds, and submerged logs. Fin rays strengthened to provide both propulsion and stability, while muscles attached along the vertebral column enhanced maneuverability. In Tiktaalik, the combination of flexible fins and reinforced bones allowed for a semi-pulled motion along muddy bottoms, an early form of walking in water. Acanthostega, with multiple digits on each limb, could use subtle shifts in weight to pivot and turn precisely, evading ambush predators or positioning itself for sudden lunges at prey. These morphological innovations highlight a critical stage in vertebrate evolution, mastering water as a platform for both feeding and protection while minimizing land exposure. Bones within the pectoral fins were reinforced with dense cortical layers, transmitting force precisely to muscles that powered subtle turns and sudden lunges. This structure allowed Tiktaalik and Acanthostega to execute fine-scale adjustments while navigating cluttered aquatic environments, from mud-choked channels to root-laden pools. Microanatomical analysis of fossilized fin bones shows attachment points for muscles capable of both rotation and extension, enabling a combination of rowing, paddling, and bracing motions. Such adaptations reduced energy expenditure during slow, deliberate movements, while providing sudden bursts of power for ambushing prey or avoiding predators. Additionally, the skeletal configuration permitted partial weight bearing on the substrate, bridging the gap between fully aquatic and early semi-terrestrial locomotion. These innovations reflect a selective balance between safety, mobility, and feeding efficiency in shallow water habitats, illustrating how anatomy and environment co-evolved to refine movement strategies. Navigating through reeds, submerged logs, and shallow pools required more than anatomical adaptation. It demanded sensory refinement. Lateral lines detected minute water vibrations, revealing the presence of nearby prey or predators before visual confirmation was possible. Eyes positioned dorsally allowed both Tiktaalik and Acanthostega to scan for movement while keeping their bodies partially concealed. These enhancements enabled calculated strikes and evasive maneuvers in spaces cluttered with vegetation and debris, demonstrating that mobility was inseparable from perception, a synergy that water sanctuaries encouraged over the chaotic and dangerous terrestrial terrain. The contrast with the land could not have been more stark. While gorgonopsids prowled, giant scorpions scuttled, and arthropleurids roamed the jagged terrain, these early tetrapods refined techniques that reduced dependence on terrestrial excursions. By learning to push, pull, and pivot through water, they accessed abundant food sources without risking exposure to terrestrial superpredators. The shallow pools and mudflats became arenas for experimentation, where the interplay between body structure and environment dictated success, shaping behaviors that would eventually allow for fully aquatic lifestyles or, in later lineages, confident terrestrial exploration. Comparisons with fully aquatic species, such as early lungfish and temnospondyl amphibians, reveal the subtle pressures driving this transition. While lungfish relied heavily on fin-based propulsion and periodic lung breathing, Tiktaalik and Acanthostega developed combinations of support and swimming that maximized versatility. Observing their movements in reconstructed habitats demonstrates a deliberate trade-off. Limbs strong enough to brace against obstacles or temporarily lift off the substrate, yet flexible and light enough to maintain efficient swimming. This dual capability exemplifies the evolutionary experimentation occurring in shallow, predator-safe waters, a crucible where anatomy and environment co-evolved in response to both opportunity and risk. Predation pressures within these waters also shaped locomotion strategies. Slow, controlled movements minimized detection by ambush predators such as Hyneria, while bursts of acceleration allowed sudden strikes at small prey or rapid retreats into vegetation. Limb motion became rhythmically linked with tail propulsion, producing a fluidity of movement that conserved energy over repeated journeys through these aquatic sanctuaries. Fossil trackways preserved in fine silt suggest that even semi-terrestrial excursions were limited, brief, and carefully executed, underscoring the ongoing preference for water as a safer, more predictable environment. Every calculated movement, whether for hunting, hiding, or exploration, expanded the range of habitats that these transitional species could exploit. Pools connected by slow-moving streams offered corridors rich in invertebrates and small fish, while deeper channels provided temporary shelter from aerial or aquatic threats. By mastering these corridors, early vertebrates effectively minimized terrestrial risk, demonstrating that mobility and environmental awareness were as critical to survival as size, strength, or predatory capability. The shallow waters, structured by reeds, silt, and logs, were both stage and teacher, rewarding precision, experimentation, and patience. Through the subtle innovations of Tiktaalik and Acantostega, a pattern emerged. Life in water could be more than mere refuge. It could be a platform for exploration, foraging, and evolutionary experimentation. Limbs evolved not simply for terrestrial conquest, but for controlling motion in a dynamic, three-dimensional, aquatic world. Every adaptation enhanced access to food, protection from predators, and the ability to navigate complex environments, marking a decisive shift in the survival strategies of vertebrates. The interplay of anatomy, behavior, and environment revealed that mastery of movement in water was the gateway to both safety and opportunity, setting the stage for future species to traverse ever wider ecological frontiers while avoiding the lethal unpredictability of land. Hunters of the blue. Ripples betrayed Hyneria's approach long before it appeared, the murky currents bending around its muscular, elongated body as it glided through the deeper channels of the river. Its large, crescent-shaped tail generated sudden bursts of propulsion, while eyes positioned atop a flattened head scanned for movement along the silty bottom. Rows of sharp, conical teeth, some exceeding 5 centimeters in length, were perfectly aligned to seize struggling prey, and its strong pectoral fins allowed brief stabilization against submerged logs or mudbanks. Fossilized gill and muscle structures suggest bursts of energy could be deployed with startling precision, giving this apex predator a near unstoppable capacity for ambush in shallow water, where smaller vertebrates like juvenile temnospondyls and early lungfish were both vulnerable and abundant. Eurypterids, the giant sea scorpions, prowled the riverbeds and marginal lagoons with a predatory elegance of their own. Their segmented exoskeletons, armoured with rigid plates, protected them from both environmental hazards and counterattacks, while jointed walking limbs tipped with spines allowed grasping and precise manipulation of prey. Specimens reaching over 2 meters long could crush or pin down even moderately sized vertebrates, while their flexible tails and paddle-like appendages powered controlled swimming in pursuit or retreat. Sensory hairs along their limbs detected subtle vibrations, alerting them to nearby prey or predators and making them formidable hunters in a world that seemed safe only in surface appearance. Fins flexed and tails lashed as prey species responded with rapid, calculated movements. Temnospondyls, lungfish, and early tetrapods used lateral line systems to sense water displacement and detect the approach of predators before they were visually apparent. When Hyneria lunged from the shadows, prey executed directional bursts and zigzag swimming, weaving through submerged vegetation or ducking behind silt mounds. Fossilized trackways and sediment impressions suggest that such evasive maneuvers were highly coordinated, highlighting a level of behavioral sophistication rarely attributed to vertebrates of this era. Camouflage became a language of survival. Mottled skin patterns, flattened body shapes, and strategic stillness transformed ordinary plants and submerged debris into invisible shields. Juvenile temnospondyls could disappear beneath mats of algae or among the tangled roots of early aquatic plants, relying on minimal movement to avoid detection. Even in open water, lungfish would adopt slow, rolling movements, blending into the filtered sunlight and soft silt to escape notice. This interplay of morphology, behavior, and environment demonstrates that predation risk, even in safe waters, drove innovation in both form and strategy. Ambush tactics were mirrored by counter-ambush. Predators adjusted their approach to water currents and shadow angles, while prey learned to anticipate bursts of attack, retreating into narrow channels or under logs. In some cases, Hyneria appeared to synchronize its lunging movements with subtle environmental cues, such as displaced sediment or fleeing invertebrates, highlighting a sophisticated understanding of both prey behavior and the aquatic landscape. Smaller predators, including juvenile eurypterids, developed complementary strategies, herding or flushing prey into confined areas where larger predators could strike, creating micropredator dynamics within these shallow habitats. Even minor topographical features of the river and lagoon shaped interactions. Submerged logs, mounds of silt, and dense vegetation clusters became strategic points, both for predators to stage attacks and for prey to hide or escape. Temnospondyls learned to exploit these features, pivoting around logs, burrowing partially into mud, and holding still to avoid lateral line detection. The environmental complexity amplified the effectiveness of both predator and prey strategies, creating a dynamic equilibrium where movement, perception, and timing determined survival. Water flow itself became a subtle ally and adversary, as currents shaped both predator approach and prey evasion. Shallow rivers and lagoons were rarely still. Eddies, backflows, and turbulence created microhabitats that prey species could exploit for cover and energy conservation. Juvenile temnospondyls often position themselves in low-velocity zones behind submerged debris, allowing them to remain hidden while expending minimal effort. Similarly, early lungfish adjusted their orientation to take advantage of upstream currents, drifting silently toward feeding grounds while staying alert to predators. Fossilized sediment patterns suggest that predators like Hyneria timed their lunges with areas of faster flow, using momentum to amplify strike speed, while eurypterids leveraged tail and limb strokes to navigate complex microcurrents with minimal drag. These interactions reveal a dynamic understanding of fluid mechanics in primitive aquatic ecosystems, where survival depended not just on anatomy or behavior, but also on mastering the invisible architecture of moving water. Predation pressure reinforced behavioral sophistication across species. Schooling patterns emerged in some juvenile lungfish, where coordinated swimming reduced individual risk and confused would-be attackers. Temnospondyls displayed sudden bursts of lateral movement timed with predator strikes, and Acanthostega juveniles experimented with alternating fin strokes to navigate quickly through narrow corridors. Each encounter acted as a selective force, favoring individuals that could process environmental cues rapidly, execute controlled movement, and utilize available cover effectively. Sensory acuity, muscular coordination, and environmental awareness merged to form a comprehensive survival toolkit. The lateral lines of fish and early tetrapods, the vision of Hyneria, and the vibration-sensitive hairs of eurypterids all worked in parallel, shaping the way organisms detected, reacted to, and predicted movement. Even subtle differences in tail flexibility or fin articulation could mean the difference between capture and escape, underscoring how anatomical refinement and behavioral strategy evolved together under the pressure of aquatic predation. Each encounter left a lasting imprint on evolutionary pathways. Species that developed greater agility, enhanced sensory systems, or improved camouflage found more opportunities to forage safely and reproduce successfully, while predators honed attack efficiency and energy conservation. These pressures drove rapid innovation in movement, physiology, and behavior, turning the aquatic refuge into a laboratory of selective experimentation. In this interplay of hunter and hunted, life in water was no longer merely a safer alternative to the terrestrial chaos. It had become a stage for evolutionary mastery, where adaptation, perception, and strategy defined the margins between survival and oblivion. The dance of hunter and hunted transformed the sanctuary of shallow water into a proving ground, where success depended on both skill and subtlety. While land remained a place of indiscriminate peril, aquatic habitats demanded intelligence, reflex, and coordination, reinforcing adaptations that would shape future vertebrate evolution. In these dynamic waters, every ripple, shadow, and movement carried meaning, preparing life for the next evolutionary challenge, where the balance of risk and opportunity would continue to define the boundaries of survival, armor, and agility. Thick plates overlapped along the head and thorax of placoderms, absorbing the force of ambush strikes while preserving flexibility for agile fin movement. These armored fish, some stretching over 2 meters, bore heavy yet articulating exoskeletons that allowed them to pivot, twist, and accelerate when threatened. Fossil analysis reveals that the plates were not solid blocks but interlocked segments with small gaps, enabling slight bending and rotation, a critical balance between protection and maneuverability in predator-dense waters. Musculature attached to these plates facilitated precise control, allowing sudden bursts of speed when evading Hyneria or eurypterids lurking among riverbeds and submerged vegetation. Ostracoderms glided through shallow pools, their dense dermal shields reflecting muted sunlight and creating an almost metallic camouflage against silt-laden water. Some species sported elongated spines along the dorsal midline and fin edges, deterring bites while allowing undeterred swimming. Their heavily armoured bodies distributed mechanical stress efficiently, reducing vulnerability in collisions or predator attacks. Fossils indicate that even the tail regions were lightly reinforced, enhancing propulsion while minimizing drag, a subtle design optimizing both defense and mobility in a 3-dimensional aquatic environment. Fin positioning and tail dynamics allowed armored species to weave with surprising grace among submerged logs, silt mounds, and dense plant clusters. Pectoral fins extended outward with articulated joints, enabling small rotations that assisted navigation through narrow channels. Pelvic fins provided stability during sudden lateral movements, preventing tipping or unintended contact with obstacles. Tail flexibility, combined with muscle attachments along the vertebral column, created controlled thrusts for acceleration or abrupt directional changes, illustrating that protection did not necessitate clumsiness. Each movement, calculated and precise, reflected evolutionary refinement honed by survival pressures from both predators and environmental hazards. Even minor articulations within plating demonstrated evolutionary sophistication, balancing protection with the need for maneuverability in predator-filled waters. Tiny grooves and ridges allowed for slight compression and expansion as fins moved or bodies twisted, preventing stress fractures while maintaining coverage. In high-energy zones near shallow channels or riffles, armoured species adjusted their posture, angling plates to reduce drag and maintain control against currents. These subtle innovations reveal that the evolution of armour was not merely defensive, but integrally linked with hydrodynamics, energy efficiency, and spatial awareness, allowing life to thrive in habitats where unarmoured species struggled. Growth and regeneration complemented armour, ensuring that protective strategies kept pace with the pressures of predator-filled waters. Placoderms and ostracoderms did not remain static after hatching. Fossil evidence shows incremental growth of plates and dermal armour throughout their lives, with new layers forming at edges and around joints. This continuous development allowed juveniles to survive early vulnerabilities while gradually increasing resistance to larger predators. In addition, fin rays and tail musculature strengthened over time, improving swimming efficiency as body mass and armour increased. Some species also show signs of regenerative capacity, where damaged plates could partially recover after minor attacks, highlighting an additional layer of resilience. The interplay of growth, repair, and agility demonstrates that survival in these aquatic arenas depended not only on existing armour, but also on dynamic, lifelong adaptation to predation and environmental hazards. Sensory systems remained keenly attuned, with lateral lines detecting water disturbances, while armoured exteriors minimised vulnerability to strikes. Placoderms' paired sensory canals, running along the head and trunk, allowed detection of subtle pressure waves, enabling preemptive adjustments in fin or tail movement. Ostracoderms, though slower, compensated with denser nerve endings along the body's surface, sensing vibrations from approaching predators or fleeing prey. This combination of armoured protection and refined perception created a resilient interface between organism and environment, turning each armoured individual into both a predator-aware sentinel and a foraging opportunist. Interactions with predators became a calculated exchange of speed, reflex, and protective design. When Hyneria lunged from murky shadows, armoured fish executed controlled dodges, angling plates to absorb glancing impacts while using bursts of tail propulsion to evade capture. Eurypterids attempting grasp and crush tactics were thwarted by dorsal spines and overlapping plates, forcing predators to adjust attack strategies or abandon pursuit. Such encounters highlight that survival was not solely a matter of physical robustness, but an intricate dance of anticipation, structural engineering, and responsive motion. Microhabitats within these shallow waters offered strategic advantages to armoured species, turning debris, plant mats, and silt mounds into both cover and manoeuvring space. Placoderms could wedge themselves partially among submerged logs, using their rigid plating to shield vulnerable fins, while lungfish and smaller armoured species exploited narrow channels to funnel predators away or escape through constricted paths. The combination of armor, agility, and environmental exploitation allowed species to access richer feeding grounds previously deemed too risky, expanding their ecological footprint while minimizing exposure to both aquatic and occasional terrestrial threats. Behavioral adaptations intertwined seamlessly with physical defenses. Sudden pivots, slow stalking, coordinated bursts, and evasive weaving were all amplified by structural armor, which provided confidence to explore riskier zones without sacrificing mobility. Fossilized trackways and sediment impressions suggest these movements were repeated and patterned, indicating that individuals learned, adapted, and perfected techniques over their lifetimes. This interplay of cognition, anatomy, and hydrodynamics demonstrates that protection and agility were not opposing traits, but complementary strategies sculpted by selective pressures in predator-rich aquatic realms. Over time, the synergy of armor and nimble swimming facilitated broader ecological exploration. Species could colonize shallow channels, lagoons, and river margins avoided by unarmored competitors, exploiting both food and shelter. The combination of physical and behavioral sophistication not only ensured survival, but also promoted niche diversification, allowing life to experiment with feeding strategies, social interactions, and reproductive behaviors with reduced mortality risk. In this way, the armored pioneers of the aquatic frontier transformed safety into opportunity, demonstrating that evolution favored those who could integrate defense with deft motion, turning vulnerability into a competitive advantage. Through every fin stroke, tail flick, and protective maneuver, life in armored form illustrated that survival demanded both resilience and finesse. The balance of offense, defense, and precise navigation transformed predator-laden waters into arenas for innovation, where structural design met behavioral acumen. As species ventured deeper into complex aquatic habitats, they redefined the relationship between risk and reward, proving that adaptation in motion and armor could turn the hazards of water into pathways for exploration, growth, and evolutionary triumph. These same pressures and innovations would lay the groundwork for the next stage, where even richer habitats awaited those able to master both body and environment. Havens of life. Where protective designs once dictated survival, ecological architecture now shapes the destinies of species seeking quieter waters. Reefs, lagoons, and tangled mangrove-like root systems formed natural fortresses where early aquatic life could forage, hide, and reproduce with a reduced risk of predation. The interplay of light, shadow, and water movement created a three-dimensional landscape in which every crevice, overhang, and root mat was a potential refuge. Within this mosaic, life experimented with specialization, exploiting niches that required neither brute strength nor armor, but rather awareness, adaptability, and a keen sense of place. Across limestone outcrops and coral-like structures, dense microbial reefs created labyrinths of crevices that sheltered early invertebrates and juvenile vertebrates alike. Tabulate corals and stromatoporoids grew in layered colonies, forming small towers and tunnels just wide enough for young labyrinthodonts to slip through, but too narrow for larger aquatic predators such as Hyneria. Fossilized impressions suggest these nooks also supported mollusks and tiny arthropods, creating bustling mini-ecosystems where feeding, hiding, and growth were intimately linked to the structure of the reef itself. Such architectural complexity allowed juveniles to develop behaviors and locomotor skills within a protected arena, learning to navigate currents, avoid predators, and forage efficiently. Between these sheltered protrusions, suspended sediments filtered sunlight into shimmering gradients that guided young labyrinthodonts toward insect larvae and small crustaceans. These animals relied on lateral line systems to detect subtle water movements, exploiting calm eddies to hunt while remaining concealed. Even minor variations in sediment density affected visibility, subtly influencing feeding success and predator detection. These micro-environmental nuances transformed the simple act of foraging into a strategic dance, demonstrating that survival was as dependent on perceptive skill as on physical prowess or armored protection. Within warm coastal lagoons, fluctuating salinity sculpted communities dominated by hardy juvenile lungfish, whose spiral-valved intestines allowed efficient digestion of detritus, small mollusks, and other benthic organisms. Shallow margins experience cycles of evaporation and replenishment, concentrating nutrients and creating pockets of high productivity. Fossil evidence indicates that these juveniles often congregated in dense groups, a social behavior likely aimed at diluting predation risk and exploiting the richest feeding zones. By mastering such ephemeral environments, lungfish and similar species gained an advantage over less adaptable competitors, establishing strategies that would endure across evolutionary time. Amid tangled root-like networks of early vascular plants, silt-stabilizing rhizomes formed natural nurseries where soft-bodied arthropods thrived beyond the reach of major predators. The roots not only anchored sediment, but also created labyrinthine passageways where small fish and amphibians could shelter, feed, and breed with minimal exposure to threats. Detritus accumulated among these roots, fueling microbe-rich layers that supported invertebrate populations, which in turn fed vertebrate juveniles. The intertwining of biological and geological structures turned these areas into hotspots of productivity, highlighting the intimate link between habitat complexity and survival success. In the labyrinthine reefs, competition and cooperation intertwined as juvenile lungfish and small amphibians navigated overlapping territories with cautious precision. Microhabitat partitioning allowed multiple species to exploit similar resources without direct conflict, while subtle behavioral cues like schooling or following helped reduce predation risk. Fossil and trace evidence suggests that certain invertebrates even provided a form of indirect protection for juveniles, offering warning signals or acting as moving cover. These interactions shaped not only immediate survival, but also developmental trajectories, teaching young vertebrates to forage intelligently, avoid danger, and negotiate social complexity within a safe environment. Near the seabed, mats of photosynthetic algae generated thriving micro-ecosystems that sustained mollusks, trilobite descendants, and tiny fish seeking safe foraging routes. Algal fronds attenuated light, creating dappled shadows that provided cover while still allowing enough illumination for predatory or scavenging activity. Fossilized remnants of these mats indicate that their density influenced predator-prey interactions, acting both as concealment and as a conveyor of nutrients within the food web. In this layered environment, juvenile vertebrates could develop sensory acuity, refining movements, strikes, and evasions before ever confronting larger predators. Currents and shifting sediments constantly reshaped the shallow waters, demanding both flexibility and foresight from inhabitants of these aquatic sanctuaries. Juvenile labyrinthodonts adjusted movements to avoid sudden turbidity, while lungfish could burrow or exploit sediment pockets during low oxygen episodes. Invertebrates anchored themselves to stable substrates or clung to vegetation to withstand water movement, and algae mats shifted, creating ever-changing patterns of light, shadow, and food availability. These environmental dynamics reinforced behavioral plasticity, ensuring that survival depended not solely on physical adaptations, but also on keen responsiveness to the ebb and flow of the habitat itself. At the margins of deeper pools, chemical gradients rich in calcium and phosphates supported protective egg clusters laid by amphibious species adapted to variable oxygen levels. Eggs adhered to stable substrates, sheltered by plant matter or reef structures, allowing embryonic development in relative safety. Oxygen-rich microzones promoted faster growth, while isolated, low-oxygen pockets discouraged predation by larger, oxygen-demanding species. These early reproductive strategies demonstrate the selective pressures that aquatic habitats imposed, rewarding precise placement, timing, and exploitation of subtle environmental features. Toward the quieter shallows, the delicate balance of shelter and nutrients encouraged specialization in ways that signaled a turning point in how aquatic communities were structured, hinting at even more refined adaptations to come. Juvenile species refined locomotion, foraging, and social behaviors within these protective arenas, while invertebrates diversified to exploit microhabitats invisible to larger predators. Life here was a dynamic interplay of architecture, chemistry, and behavior, a network in which every organism influenced the survival and growth of others. The richness of these habitats foreshadowed a future in which specialization and ecological sophistication would dominate, as species increasingly relied on the subtleties of water over the unpredictability of land, from foragers to predators. Beneath the waving fronds of algae and tangled roots, subtle ripples betrayed the presence of a lurking predator. In waters once dominated by grazing and cautious exploration, Rhizodus, a massive lobe-finned fish, patrolled the shadows with deliberate patience. Its streamlined body allowed it to glide almost silently through shallow lagoons, while eyes positioned for binocular vision detected the faintest disturbances in the water. Even slight vibrations from small lungfish or juvenile labyrinthodonts sent signals through the lateral line system, alerting the hunter to opportunity. In these rich, protective waters, the transition from passive foraging to active predation marked a profound evolutionary turning point, where survival depended on more than hiding it, required calculation and precision. Jaw structure and tooth arrangement told a story of calculated specialization. Rhizodus's long, fang-like teeth were angled and serrated to pierce slippery prey and hold it firmly, while robust jaw muscles delivered rapid, crushing force. Other predatory species, including early paddlefish-like chondrosteans and large eurypterids, developed specialized appendages or fin structures for ambushing smaller vertebrates and invertebrates. Fossilized bite marks on juvenile labyrinthodonts indicate repeated predation events, highlighting how tooth morphology, jaw strength, and bite precision were not merely anatomical curiosities, but the key tools of survival. Such adaptations also reshaped behavior. Prey species learned to navigate currents strategically, avoid open zones, and utilize structural refuges with increasing sophistication. In open lagoons, juvenile labyrinthodonts and lungfish learned the hard lessons of these new predators. Schooling behaviors emerged as a primary defense, where synchronized movement reduced individual vulnerability and created confusion during sudden strikes. Camouflage and shadow exploitation became essential, with subtle changes in coloration and movement patterns allowing prey to blend with algae mats, root tangles, and sediment layers. Fossilized trackways and burrow impressions indicate that many small species sought shelter during daylight hours, emerging only under reduced visibility conditions to forage. Such behaviors were not instinct alone. They reflected an iterative learning process shaped by repeated encounters with predators, demonstrating the interplay of anatomy, behavior, and environment. In murky waters and shifting currents, the perception of the world became an art form. Predators, like Rhizodus and Eurypterids, refined their sensory abilities, using lateral line detection, electroreception, and keen eyesight to track even minute movements. Currents carried vibrations and chemical cues across meters, giving predators advance notice of approaching prey. Prey species, in turn, evolved heightened sensitivity to these environmental signals, adjusting fin strokes, body posture, and movement timing to avoid detection. The interplay of perception and evasion transformed water into a medium of communication, strategy, and survival, where every ripple could determine life or death. The water itself became a medium of strategy. Vibrations transmitted through currents revealed both predator and prey, and chemical signals from mucus trails or excreted metabolites communicated presence or readiness. Rhizodus, with its acute lateral line system, could detect even the briefest fin flicks from potential prey, while Eurypterids used sensory appendages to probe murky waters for movement. In turn, prey species exploited subtle cues, retreating to sediment-laden pockets or weaving through root networks to disrupt sensory detection. Each strike, each evasion, became part of a continuous dialogue, a high-stakes conversation between hunter and hunted, conducted entirely through water. Each reef crevice and algal tangle offered a lesson in survival strategy. Small vertebrates and invertebrates specialized to exploit microhabitats, using sediment pockets, root tunnels, and shadowed zones to avoid detection. Juvenile lungfish burrowed into soft silt, labyrinthodonts darted among overhanging roots, and invertebrates slithered into narrow crevices. Predators adapted alongside these behaviors, learning preferred ambush points, hunting pathways, and how to use currents to corner prey. This dynamic reinforced selective pressure on both hunters and hunted, creating localized hotspots of interaction where ecological complexity intensified with each generation. Each successful strike reshaped local food webs. The removal of vulnerable juveniles influenced competition among remaining species, while predation pressure drove specialization in foraging, reproductive timing, and habitat selection. Smaller vertebrates adapted by exploiting narrow crevices, shifting feeding times to avoid peak predator activity, or developing thicker scales and spines for protection. Invertebrates, from burrowing mollusks to armored ostracoderms, responded with behavioral shifts, altering the timing and location of grazing and sheltering. The emergence of active hunters thus created a complex web of interdependence, where the evolutionary success of one species was intrinsically tied to the adaptive responses of many others. Predators such as Rhizodus relied on a combination of stealth, burst speed, and sensory acuity, exploiting both structure and light to their advantage. Fossil evidence shows that these fish could accelerate rapidly in short bursts, a skill critical for ambushing prey in the shallow, obstacle-filled environment. Similarly, Eurypterids used their paddle-like limbs to maneuver with precision, cornering smaller fish or amphibians against root tangles or sediment ridges. These behaviors required not only anatomical specialization, but also environmental awareness, demonstrating that intelligence, strategy, and perception were as important as raw power in survival. The arms race between hunter and hunted intensified, creating selective pressures that favored rapid adaptation. Prey species that could outmaneuver predators, detect subtle vibrations, or exploit previously unused microhabitats had higher survival rates, while predators refined their hunting strategies through both anatomical improvements and behavioral innovation. Fossilized remains indicate that this dynamic led to increased diversity in both predatory and prey lineages, with repeated cycles of adaptation reinforcing ecological complexity. In these waters, life learned that safety, abundance, and opportunity were inextricably linked to vigilance, skill, and adaptation. Even within the protected labyrinths of reefs and lagoons, survival demanded ingenuity as the line between refuge and risk continually shifted beneath the surface. Juvenile vertebrates developed acute timing, refined reflexes, and precise fin movements, while predators constantly recalibrated their strategies to exploit weaknesses or environmental changes. Observing these interactions is akin to watching a living network of cause and effect, a choreography of survival that balances stealth, aggression, and awareness in three-dimensional space. This delicate tension between hunter and hunted not only defined the day-to-day life of these creatures, but also laid the evolutionary groundwork for more complex, predatory, and defensive behaviors in aquatic ecosystems to come. The art of ambush, currents whispered secrets of approaching danger and opportunity alike, carrying the faintest vibrations of struggling prey or the subtle sweep of a predator's fin. In these waters, patience was as lethal a weapon as jaws or claws, and understanding the medium itself became essential for survival. Every ripple, shadow, and suspended particle could betray or conceal a creature, transforming even a brief passage through a lagoon into a careful negotiation with life and death. Hidden among submerged roots and creeping vegetation, eurypterids lay coiled and motionless, their segmented bodies camouflaged against sediment and plant matter. With every passing second, their paddle-like limbs twitched imperceptibly, ready to propel them with sudden velocity at any unsuspecting fish or amphibian that drifted too close. Fossil evidence from Devonian and Carboniferous beds reveals traces of repeated ambush activity, where eurypterids exploited the same microhabitats over generations, honing precision and patience into an art form. Ambush fish hovered in still pockets beneath overhangs, their flattened bodies and muted coloration making them almost invisible against the silty bottom. Species such as early acanthodians employed subtle, energy-efficient adjustments to remain motionless for extended periods, conserving oxygen while scanning for prey. Their eyes, oriented to maximize field coverage, detected the faintest disturbances in light or water movement, ensuring that any approach by juvenile labyrinthodonts or small lungfish would not go unnoticed. Juvenile labyrinthodonts froze mid-stroke, relying on sensory perception rather than brute speed alone. Their lateral line systems detected vibrations, allowing them to sense predators hiding just beyond sight, while their slender bodies could slip silently into narrow crevices or under mats of vegetation. Survival required the mastery of stillness and timing. Even a single twitch or splash could invite lethal attention. These behaviors were iterative, honed by repeated encounters and reflected in both fossilized trackways and preserved plant impressions that indicate frequent use of hidden routes. Water itself became a conduit for strategy, carrying vibrations and chemical signals that informed both hunters and prey. Rhizodus and other active predators sensed these currents, interpreting minute fluctuations in pressure to predict movement and locate hidden prey. In turn, smaller vertebrates and invertebrates exploited knowledge of hydrodynamics, positioning themselves in eddies, behind roots, or within sediment depressions where currents masked their presence. The environment was not static, it was an interactive medium, shaping behavior and adaptation as much as anatomy did. In murky water, where visibility faltered, creatures relied on an invisible network of vibrations and chemical cues to detect both opportunity and threat. The lateral line systems of labyrinthodonts, coupled with chemical sensing in lungfish and eurypterids, allowed them to anticipate the approach of others with remarkable accuracy. Minute pressure changes, subtle shifts in water temperature, and dissolved chemical traces conveyed information that could determine whether a predator launched an attack or a prey darted into safety. Fossilized impressions and sediment patterns suggest that these sensory abilities were central to survival in complex aquatic habitats. Even the smallest movements revealed intentions, exploited by predators capable of interpreting subtle cues. Slight changes in fin angle, a shift in posture, or the faint displacement of sediment could trigger a predatory strike. This constant tension, where a predator's patience met a prey's vigilance, demanded cognitive processing, rapid reflexes, and a deep attunement to the physical environment. Evolution selected for creatures that could balance these demands, producing a community in which stealth, timing, and awareness became as critical as teeth or armor. Every snarl of roots, every patch of floating vegetation, reshaped the tactics of hunter and hunted alike. Predators like rhizodus and ambush fish learned to calculate angles of approach, exploiting shadows and obstacles to mask their presence until the final strike. Prey species, in turn, developed zigzag escape routes, used multiple hiding spots, or froze for long stretches to avoid detection. Fossilized trackways and sediment impressions document repeated patterns of ambush and evasion, revealing a sophisticated interplay between environmental complexity and behavioral adaptation that shaped evolutionary trajectories. Refuge within dense vegetation required precise navigation. One misstep could expose a labyrinthodont or lungfish to a waiting eurypterid, while overexposure risked detection by rhizodus patrolling nearby channels. Fossilized burrows and plant root impressions reveal how prey species navigated these labyrinthine zones with a mix of caution and efficiency. They learned to exploit light gradients, shadowed recesses, and structural complexity to remain undetected, gradually refining behaviors that would become inherited survival strategies over generations. Over time, microhabitat specialization became a crucial determinant of survival. Juvenile lungfish and small amphibians adapted to use narrow sediment pockets, tangled roots, and algae mats as staging zones, while predators learned to anticipate prey movements and identify the most profitable ambush locations. These interactions drove localized evolutionary pressures, shaping morphology, behavior, and community structure. Predators became more precise, prey more vigilant, and both co-evolved within the constraints and opportunities of their watery environments. The interplay of stealth, patience, and timing reshaped local food webs. Predators' selective strikes influenced population structures, driving prey species to diversify habitat use, adjust feeding schedules, and refine escape tactics. Fossil evidence shows repeated predation patterns, suggesting a continuous feedback loop where behavioral innovation in both predator and prey drove ecological complexity. Each ambush was not merely a hunt, but an evolutionary lesson, teaching species the critical importance of observation, restraint, and adaptation in a three-dimensional, dynamic environment. Every motion in these shadowed waters demanded mastery of timing, movement, and perception, defining life itself. Stealth and patience transformed lagoons, reefs, and vegetation mats into arenas where every ripple could signal opportunity or danger. The creatures that thrived were those who embraced subtlety as survival, honing skills that would influence future aquatic lineages. From these interactions emerged a sophisticated choreography of life, a prelude to even more refined adaptations, where safety, strategy, and environmental mastery would dictate evolutionary success. Migration through safe waters. As shadows of predators receded, creatures began to navigate beyond their local refuges, guided by instinct and subtle environmental cues. Shallow lagoons, winding rivers, and sun-dappled channels became arenas of deliberate movement, where survival depended not merely on stillness, but on mastering the art of passage. Every bend in a river, every submerged log, presented both hazard and opportunity, demanding attention, precision, and the ability to anticipate danger while seeking nourishment. Early coelacanths and juvenile labyrinthodonts began exploring corridors that allowed them to access richer food sources without the unpredictable perils of land. Currents became invisible highways, carrying travelers along predictable routes of sustenance and safety. Species learned to exploit these flows, letting water assist their propulsion while reducing the energetic cost of long-distance travel. Fossil evidence from Devonian and Carboniferous deposits reveals sedimentary traces aligned along repeated paths, indicating that migration routes were habitual and guided by environmental conditions. These routes optimized access to aquatic vegetation, invertebrate prey, and shallow hunting grounds, demonstrating that migration was a sophisticated ecological strategy rather than random movement. Early coelacanths synchronized fin movements to maintain energy-efficient paths through rivers and lagoons. Their lobed fins allowed precise control in currents, facilitating navigation around debris, submerged vegetation, and the shifting contours of riverbeds. This fine motor control enabled coelacanths to exploit both shallow hunting zones and deeper resting areas, minimizing exposure to larger predators like Hyneria while maximizing foraging efficiency. Juvenile labyrinthodonts relied on physical landmarks, water chemistry, and subtle temperature gradients to navigate complex waterways. By sensing shifts in pH, dissolved oxygen, and mineral content, these amphibians could track familiar corridors even when visual markers were obscured. Such environmental sensitivity allowed them to locate optimal feeding areas, avoid predator-heavy channels, and identify suitable sites for shelter or later dispersal, reflecting an early integration of sensory and cognitive adaptations for survival. Early lungfish also participated in these aquatic migrations, using seasonal water level changes to expand their foraging range. As floodplains rose during rainy periods, lungfish could move into newly accessible pools and inundated channels, feeding on mollusks and plant detritus. These migrations required both stamina and precise timing, as premature movement risked stranding in shallow pools or encountering aggressive predators, highlighting the delicate balance between opportunity and hazard in dynamic freshwater ecosystems. Temporary microhabitats became vital for migratory success. Pools hidden behind submerged logs, mats of dense aquatic vegetation, and natural depressions in the riverbed provided resting points for juvenile coelacanths, labyrinthodonts, and small placoderms. These areas offered shelter from eurypterids and ambush fish, allowed for concentrated feeding, and served as safe havens during high-risk periods. Fossilized traces of repeated occupation suggest that these microhabitats were well-known stops along migration routes, integral to the survival strategy of multiple species. Schooling behavior offered both protection and enhanced detection of food sources. Groups of juvenile coelacanths, early placoderms, and lungfish coordinated movements, with peripheral individuals scanning for predators while central members accessed the richest foraging zones. The fluidity of these schools created confusion effects against predatory eurypterids and large ambush fish, reducing individual risk while allowing efficient navigation across long distances. Observations of modern analogues, combined with fossil evidence of repeated schooling patterns, suggest that social coordination was an early evolutionary strategy for migration and safety. Seasonal shifts in temperature, water levels, and vegetation dictated the timing of long-distance movement. Rising waters created temporary channels, opening access to flooded forests and nutrient-rich wetlands, while declining water levels forced careful retreat to permanent pools. These seasonal rhythms also influenced breeding cycles, as certain shallow zones provided safer spawning grounds for species such as juvenile labyrinthodonts and placoderms. Migratory timing was thus intertwined with life history strategies, ensuring survival and reproductive success while minimizing exposure to predators like Hyneria and large eurypterids. Environmental hazards challenged even the most adept travelers. Sudden sediment influx, turbidity from heavy rainfall, or oxygen depletion in stagnant pools could delay migration or force detours. Labyrinthodonts and lungfish demonstrated behavioral flexibility, using low-flow side channels, submerged cover, or pauses in movement to navigate these risks. Such adaptations highlight that migration required not only stamina, but continuous assessment of local conditions, integrating sensory input with experience-driven decision-making. Predators lurking in certain corridors influenced route selection and movement strategies. Rhizodus and eurypterids patrolled prime hunting zones, creating areas of heightened danger that required evasive maneuvers. Migrating species responded by altering travel times, using alternative channels, or hiding in vegetation mats to avoid detection. Fossilized sediment layers and burrows provide evidence of repeated detours and stopovers, demonstrating a dynamic interplay between predator activity and prey movement that shaped both behavior and habitat selection over evolutionary timescales. Morphology evolved in direct response to migration demands. Coelacanths developed robust, lobed fins capable of precise propulsion. Labyrinthodonts strengthened tail muscles for sustained swimming, and lungfish evolved fin modifications for low-flow navigation. Lateral line systems and chemoreception allowed early detection of predators, obstacles, and environmental cues, integrating physiology with navigational mastery. These adaptations illustrate how movement itself became a selective force, shaping anatomy, behavior, and survival, turning migration into a driver of evolutionary refinement. Each successful journey reinforced survival, specialization, and ecological expansion. By mastering aquatic corridors, species could exploit dispersed food sources, colonize new habitats, and avoid the lethal unpredictability of land. These journeys shaped community dynamics, predator-prey relationships, and reproductive strategies, demonstrating that migration was not a simple response to environmental pressures, but a central driver of evolutionary innovation. Over time, the ability to move deliberately through water became a hallmark of success in this era, solidifying aquatic habitats as safer, more predictable refuges compared to the perilous terrestrial world, shaping their world. In the still pools beyond familiar currents, life began to manipulate its surroundings with purpose and precision. The quiet shallows became laboratories of ingenuity, where creatures like freshwater crayfish excavated complex networks of burrows that served both as shelter and as a means to influence local water flow. These tunnels trapped sediment, slowed currents, and retained moisture, creating small but stable environments where vulnerable juveniles could grow with reduced predation risk. Each excavation left an enduring mark on the substrate, transforming barren pools into layered microhabitats teeming with potential. Intricate burrows carved by freshwater crayfish intercepted currents and retained sediment, forming stable retreats for vulnerable juveniles. These animals were not merely passive diggers. Their activity altered the physical landscape, encouraging the accumulation of detritus and fostering plant growth in the newly stabilized areas. Juvenile labyrinthodonts, seeking refuge from predatory eurypterids and ambush fish, exploited these burrows, entering through narrow openings that only their small bodies could navigate. In this symbiosis, crayfish engineering indirectly enhanced survival for multiple species, exemplifying early ecological interdependence. Amphibians dug beneath overhanging roots and submerged logs, crafting hidden chambers that offered refuge from both predators and environmental fluctuations. Burrowing labyrinthodonts extended networks of dens that shielded them from flash floods, sudden drops in water level, and even the occasional foray of Hyneria into shallow pools. These dens were lined with soft sediment and occasionally reinforced with vegetation, illustrating a sophisticated understanding of environmental stability. Fossil evidence from Carboniferous and Devonian strata suggests that such dens were maintained across seasons, indicating consistent behavioral strategies rather than one-off attempts at shelter. Repeated stirring of silt and decaying vegetation by lungfish enhanced local nutrient availability, converting shallow pools into concentrated feeding grounds. As lungfish dug into the substrate with their lobed fins, they released trapped organic matter, enriching the water with detritus and small invertebrates. This not only facilitated their own feeding, but also attracted smaller vertebrates and invertebrates, creating bustling micro-ecosystems where prey abundance was predictable. In some cases, lungfish activity reshaped the morphology of pools themselves, deepening depressions and creating gentle channels that improved circulation and resource distribution. These engineered microhabitats fostered dense communities where multiple species could forage, hide, and interact with reduced exposure to danger. Juvenile coelacanths and early placoderms navigated the interlaced burrow systems and silted channels, exploiting the cover provided by aquatic vegetation and the structural complexity introduced by other species. Competition for these safe spaces was intense, yet the intricate networks allowed simultaneous occupation by predators and prey in different strata of the habitat. Behavioral observation of modern analogues, such as crayfish and lungfish, suggests that these interactions were dynamic, with species continuously adjusting positions, feeding patterns, and shelters in response to one another. Weaving through layers of sediment and submerged roots, chemical gradients guided life as much as solid structures did. Freshwater crayfish and lungfish inadvertently altered oxygen levels and pH in microhabitats through burrowing and feeding, creating zones where dissolved oxygen fluctuated in predictable patterns. Certain amphibians learned to exploit these gradients, gravitating toward slightly oxygen-rich layers near burrow openings or along the edges of plant mats, where prey was abundant yet predator exposure remained low. Fossilized evidence of repeated activity in similar zones suggests that these species were sensitive not only to structural modifications, but also to subtle chemical cues, reflecting an early integration of environmental sensing and spatial behavior that optimized survival in engineered microhabitats. Patterns of environmental modification reveal strategic choices rather than random activity, with individuals repeatedly returning to reshape familiar refuges. Crayfish reinforced frequently used tunnels, lungfish deepened pools near abundant detritus, and amphibians maintained burrows along safe routes through floodplain channels. This persistence illustrates a form of proto-territoriality and environmental memory, where the modification of space directly influenced survival and reproductive success. The subtle integration of behavioral foresight, spatial awareness, and repeated action marks one of the earliest known examples of ecosystem engineering among vertebrates and invertebrates alike. Sedimentary traces and fossilized burrows provide tangible evidence of these early ecosystem engineering behaviors preserved across geological timescales. Fossil slabs reveal repeated burrow patterns, compacted sediment walls, and layers of organic material that correspond to repeated habitation and sediment displacement. Trace fossils attributed to lungfish and amphibians demonstrate not only locomotion and feeding activity, but also deliberate shaping of the substrate to create more navigable or resource-rich environments. These geological records allow scientists to reconstruct the interactive networks of life in ancient waters, highlighting how behavioral innovation left measurable signatures on ecosystems. The physical alterations to rivers, channels, and pool floors influenced water flow, plant colonization, and sediment deposition, creating dynamic habitats over time. Pools sculpted by digging and sediment rearrangement became reservoirs for smaller prey, safe spawning areas for amphibians, and feeding hotspots for coelacanths and placoderms. Plant mats, stabilized by crayfish burrows, offered additional cover and nutrient cycling, supporting a denser and more predictable food web. The cumulative effect was an ecosystem increasingly structured by the active choices of its inhabitants, demonstrating that aquatic survival depended as much on manipulation of the environment as on locomotion or predation. Predatory species had to navigate this increasingly complex landscape, adapting hunting strategies to contend with hidden shelters and labyrinthine corridors. Hyneria and large eurypterids encountered obstacles that slowed or redirected their approach, forcing them to rely on ambush points near entrances or deeper, less concealed channels. This constant adaptation between prey-driven habitat modification and predator response created a dynamic feedback loop where engineering behaviors directly influenced selective pressures, reinforcing survival strategies for both sides of the predator-prey equation. Through persistent manipulation of their surroundings, aquatic species expanded the boundaries of survival, demonstrating that life could actively craft safety and opportunity rather than merely respond to it. By shaping microhabitats, these organisms transformed shallow pools, floodplain channels, and sheltered lagoons into safer, resource-rich environments, reducing the need for hazardous excursions onto land. This subtle, cumulative engineering not only enhanced survival, but also set the stage for further specialization, ecological diversity, and evolutionary innovation, highlighting the profound ways in which life could harness its environment to transcend the limitations imposed by terrestrial danger. The perilous shoreline. At the margin of the water, limbs trembled against unstable mud and jagged rocks, a stark reminder that survival beyond the aquatic refuge demanded precision, timing, and endurance. Amphibians, like early labyrinthodonts and lungfish, ventured cautiously, testing the stability of each substrate while maintaining proximity to water in case rapid retreat became necessary. Every step presented challenges. Desiccating sunlight threatened delicate skin, irregular terrain threatened balance, and unseen predators waited in shaded recesses. Unlike the predictable currents and shelters of rivers and lagoons, land was chaotic, requiring constant vigilance and adaptability that many species could not yet master. Sun-scorched banks presented hazards beyond predation. Thermoregulation became critical as water-dependent skin risked drying out under midday heat. Juvenile lungfish and small amphibians displayed intermittent movement patterns, pausing under shaded vegetation or partially submerged logs to prevent moisture loss while scanning for threats. Fossilized impressions suggest that early tetrapods measured each advance, moving in spurts synchronized with environmental cues such as shadows, water flow, and substrate texture. These excursions were not aimless. They were calculated for survival, revealing an early sophistication in behavior that integrated perception, risk assessment, and environmental memory. Moisture gradients dictated survival more than any predator's shadow. Early amphibians and lungfish had to constantly monitor the microclimate of the shoreline, seeking pockets of humidity beneath leaf litter, moss, or sediment depressions. Fossil evidence indicates that some labyrinthodonts exploited areas near evaporating pools where higher humidity persisted longer, reducing the risk of desiccation during extended excursions. Skin secretions may have supplemented this strategy, helping retain moisture and allowing slightly longer terrestrial activity than previously assumed. Such adaptations highlight the delicate balance between physiology and environmental awareness, demonstrating that survival on land depended not only on avoiding predators, but also on managing hydration in a physically unforgiving setting. Tracks preserved in silty sediment reveal careful navigation, calculated pauses, and repeated routes. Some labyrinthodonts returned repeatedly to the same shallow pools, suggesting recognition of safe paths and locations, offering both nourishment and escape routes. Fossilized footprints often converge toward temporary depressions or moist channels, hinting at the selective logic behind every terrestrial step. These patterns indicate that early vertebrates possessed not only physical adaptations for movement, but also behavioral strategies that prioritize survival over exploration, a contrast to the freedom and predictability they enjoyed in aquatic environments. Navigating the floodplain waters, juvenile lungfish relied on bursts of coordinated motion to stay ahead of ambush predators like large arthropods and gorgonopsids. By synchronizing terrestrial excursions with brief periods of shade, rain, or low predator activity, they minimized exposure. Physiological adaptations supported these maneuvers, reinforced limb structures, fin-like appendages capable of limited terrestrial propulsion, and efficient respiratory mechanisms that allowed short-lived excursions without compromising water-dependent metabolism. These innovations reflect how selective pressure on even limited terrestrial movement shaped early vertebrate evolution. Nest placement reflected a delicate balance between proximity to water and predator avoidance. Early amphibians deposited eggs in shallow depressions near protective vegetation mats, where humidity slowed desiccation and nearby pools provided easy return routes. Evidence from fossilized embryonic clusters suggests that some species synchronized egg-laying with rainfall or seasonal floods, ensuring rapid submersion after development began. The interplay of environmental cues, predator presence, and reproductive timing illustrates the complexity of survival strategies on land, highlighting that even brief terrestrial activity required careful planning, instinct, and sensory awareness. Faced with lurking predators, creatures adjusted their paths, relying on shaded vegetation, fallen timber, and burrows to hide their movements. Fossilized trackways show repeated detours around predator hotspots, and some impressions suggest rapid sprints when danger approached. Large gorgonopsids and predatory arthropods patrolled these margins, reinforcing the message that land was inherently treacherous. These encounters forced early vertebrates to optimize movement efficiency, balance energetic expenditure, and integrate environmental feedback in real time, a level of behavioral sophistication that foreshadowed more advanced terrestrial adaptations in later lineages. Driven by seasonal waters, landward journeys appear in the fossil record as synchronized with rain and flooding. Rising water levels created temporary corridors that reduced the distance between pools, minimized exposure to predation, and allowed access to new feeding grounds. Conversely, receding water forced species to retreat with caution, navigating narrower channels and fragmented pools. Seasonal rhythms dictated the timing of movements, shaping not only feeding strategies but also reproductive behavior, as certain terrestrial zones offered the only suitable egg-laying sites. Life on the shoreline was therefore a continuous negotiation between opportunity and risk, requiring precise environmental awareness and adaptive timing. Even minor miscalculations in speed, depth, or cover could result in mortality, emphasizing the stakes of each journey. Trackway fossils often terminate abruptly in areas of fine-grained sediment, suggesting sudden predation or physiological collapse. These abrupt endings remind us that life on land was not merely inconvenient, it was actively lethal for species poorly adapted to its demands. Consequently, each successful return to water reinforced the evolutionary preference for aquatic habitats, where currents, vegetation, and predictable refuges dramatically improved the odds of survival compared to the lethal unpredictability of the terrestrial world. Return journeys were equally critical, with individuals retracing careful paths to minimize exposure. Fossilized impressions show repeated movement patterns that highlight learned avoidance behaviors and environmental mapping skills. Early vertebrates developed a sense of spatial memory, recognizing landmarks, water chemistry cues, and microtopography to guide their retreat. These navigational strategies were not instinctive in isolation, they were honed through repeated experience, teaching populations which paths offered safety, which substrates supported movement, and how to balance speed with energy conservation. Stepping from water onto land, each movement revealed a fundamental evolutionary lesson. The safety of water was a selective advantage that could not be fully replicated on land. For amphibians, lungfish, and early tetrapods, terrestrial excursions were necessary yet inherently perilous, reinforcing the preference for aquatic life while driving subtle innovations in locomotion, sensory perception, and reproductive timing. The shoreline was a crucible, a place where even brief exposure tested every adaptation developed in safer waters. In navigating these margins, species deepened their mastery of the aquatic world, understanding that survival depended on exploiting predictable environments and avoiding terrestrial chaos, setting the stage for further evolutionary refinement in entirely water-bound or semi-aquatic niches. Masters of the liquid realm, under the shimmering veneer of the floodwaters, currents dictated the tempo of life and survival. Species that had once hesitated at the edge of land now moved with assured confidence, their bodies sculpted to navigate every nuance of flow. Early coelacanths adjusted fin angles with subtle micro-movements, controlling propulsion and stability with remarkable precision, while labyrinthodonts relied on tail undulations and limb paddling to thread through submerged logs and vegetation mats. Here, motion was not random. Every stroke conserved energy, avoided predators, and maximized access to food, demonstrating a mastery of water that land could never offer. Every ripple told a story, signaling the presence of prey, predator, or a safe corridor. Lateral line systems detected minuscule pressure changes, while chemosensory organs interpreted dissolved chemical cues across meters of water. Even in murky, sediment-laden channels, species such as juvenile lungfish and temnospondyls could anticipate approaching eurypterids or hyneria, adjusting course before the threat became immediate. This sensory integration transformed the aquatic environment into a medium of prediction, where knowledge of currents, flow rates, and subtle environmental gradients equaled survival. Biochemical cues in the water also played a crucial role, in survival and social coordination. Certain species, such as juvenile labyrinthodonts and early lungfish, released pheromones to signal the presence of predators or to mark feeding zones, allowing conspecifics to respond without visual confirmation. Similarly, decomposing plant material and microbial byproducts subtly altered water chemistry, guiding foraging decisions and habitat selection. Fossilized sediment cores and geochemical analyses indicate that these chemical interactions were consistent across regions, suggesting that early aquatic communities had already developed complex networks of indirect communication, enhancing both survival and resource exploitation. Submerged vegetation and debris not only provided cover, but also shaped hunting and foraging behavior. Fossilized impressions of root mats and fallen logs reveal that labyrinthodonts and juvenile coelacanths frequently navigated around these structures, using them as ambush sites or protective barriers. Even minor variations in sediment density influenced movement, forcing species to develop finely tuned spatial awareness. This intimate interaction between organisms and microtopography shows that life in water was not merely reactive, it actively read and exploited the physical contours of its environment to reduce risk and enhance feeding efficiency. Fins sliced through water with precision, choreographing movement that terrestrial life could never replicate. The coelacanth's robust lobed fins and Acanthostega's flexible digits allowed navigation in 3 dimensions, turning obstacles into advantages. Early placoderms used pectoral fin rotation to dart around submerged tree trunks, while ostracoderms relied on armored lateral projections for stabilization in strong currents. Locomotion itself became an evolutionary laboratory, shaping skeletal and muscular architecture to optimize both agility and endurance in a medium that demanded constant negotiation of forces. Sensory organs detected shifts in pressure, vibration, and chemistry, translating the invisible into actionable knowledge. Fossil evidence from Devonian strata shows well-developed lateral line canals in placoderms and coelacanths, indicating an evolutionary investment in early detection systems. These sensory adaptations allowed predators to locate hidden prey and prey to avoid ambushes, creating a perpetual arms race. Life had learned that survival was as much about interpreting subtle environmental feedback as it was about brute force. Schooling formations minimized individual risk while maximizing collective efficiency. Groups of coelacanths, lungfish, and juvenile labyrinthodonts coordinated movements so that peripheral members scanned for threats while interior individuals focused on feeding. The fluidity of these groups confused predators, reduced encounters with ambushing eurypterids, and facilitated the efficient exploitation of nutrient-rich zones. Fossilized trackways and bedding plane evidence suggest that schooling behavior was habitual, not occasional, demonstrating an early sophistication in social coordination that enhanced both survival and foraging success. Breeding strategies synchronized with environmental cues, ensuring offspring survived in predictable habitats. Seasonal floods and rising water levels created temporary spawning grounds where eggs could develop with minimal risk. Early amphibians and lungfish timed their reproductive cycles to coincide with these ephemeral pools, utilizing inundated vegetation for cover and nutrient-rich detritus for larval growth. The predictability of water enabled life to manipulate timing, ensuring that reproduction complemented environmental dynamics and reinforced the advantages of aquatic specialization. Predators and prey alike adapted to microhabitats that exploited cover, depth, and water flow. Crevices, submerged roots, and dense mats of aquatic vegetation became essential theatres for both hunting and evasion. Rhizodus, with its elongated jaw and serrated teeth, patrolled deeper channels, while ambush, fish, and eurypterids lurked in shadows and under ledges. Prey species learned to exploit vertical and horizontal gradients, hiding in shallow riffles, beneath logs, or along vegetation edges, demonstrating a complex understanding of their environment and the selective pressures shaping behavior. Hydrodynamic refinements extended beyond limbs and fins to body shape and surface texture. Coelacanths exhibited subtle ridges along their scales that reduced drag and improved maneuverability in turbulent flows, while lungfish developed streamlined bodies to traverse shallow, winding channels with minimal energy expenditure. Placoderms, in addition to armored plating, displayed flattened ventral surfaces, allowing rapid bursts along riverbeds to evade predators. These anatomical features highlight how natural selection favored an integrated suite of traits, behavioral, muscular, and morphological, optimized for navigation, hunting, and survival within the intricate three-dimensional matrix of aquatic habitats. Even the smallest invertebrates contributed to ecosystem stability, forming the foundation of an intricate food web. Freshwater crustaceans, insect larvae, and mollusks provided abundant sustenance for small vertebrates, while burrowing behaviors altered sediment structure, creating oxygenated zones and microhabitats for juvenile species. These interactions amplified the ecological complexity of shallow waters, showing that mastery of the liquid realm extended beyond locomotion and hunting. It encompassed the subtle shaping of entire communities to enhance survival prospects. By the era's end, water was no longer merely refuge. It was a stage where life achieved mastery over chance and chaos. Every adaptation, from locomotion to sensory perception, from social behavior to reproductive timing, illustrated a species' ability to exploit the safest environment of their time. Aquatic habitats offered predictability, protection, and access to resources, and species that embraced these advantages flourished, setting the foundation for future vertebrate diversification into rivers, lakes, and oceans. In perfecting life in water, these creatures demonstrated a fundamental evolutionary truth. Survival is maximized not by resisting danger blindly, but by mastering the medium in which existence unfolds. In the end, we're left with the haunting memory of a world turned inside out, where survival flowed more easily through water than over trembling, unfamiliar ground. This journey reminds us that every refuge in Earth's deep past was temporary, shaped by forces far larger than the creatures struggling within them. And as the final ripples fade across that ancient shoreline, we sense how fragile the boundary between danger and sanctuary has always been. If you'd like to continue exploring worlds like this, feel free to like, subscribe, or share your thoughts below.